The number one issue we're facing today is, I'm sorry, it's not white supremacy. It's not any of these theories that they're throwing out there. White supremacy has been around in large volumes or small volumes throughout history, but the constant in my community was there was a father in the home. Even in the worst eras of Black history in this country, we maintained the family at 70% because there was a father in the home giving guidance, giving love. You know, they may not have been perfect, you know, they may have had their scars, but they raised their children, they were masters of various crafts. When that switched around the late 1960s and the father couldn't be in the home or the family couldn't get assistance, that was the beginning of the breakdown of the Black family in our community. So no, it's not white supremacy. Unfortunately, it was the welfare system. And then later, it was the crack epidemic that almost put the nail in the coffin for our communities. Just look at the statistics. Most kids people who are in prison right now, man or woman, they didn't have a father in the home. So even though the father doesn't have to be perfect, as long as he's there as a protector, as a provider, and some kind of guide, it helps the next generation be stronger and better. And we don't have that today like we used to.
You know, you patrolled what I believe is the most dangerous 50 city blocks of the most dangerous criminal elements, mentally ill folks that are what you call double diagnoses, where they're mentally ill and they're partaking in hardcore drugs. We're talking heroin, we're talking methamphetamines, we're talking spice.
Yep.
And you've walked the streets, and when you're walking down on that 7 San Pedro area, there's a distinctive smell that's hard to describe to our audience. And it's a synthetic form of, is it marijuana? Is that what spice is?
It's a synthetic form of marijuana, but you could also use potpourri as spice. And the smell, you know it when you smell it. You walk into a cloud of almost what can almost be compared to a burning tire. And it's very powerful. And it also, even just being around the smoke can impact you. We had officers succumb to the smoke when we had to rescue 17 spice addicts who overdosed. We had to create a triage at 5th and San Pedro for about 17 spice victims of a spice overdose, and a couple of officers were impacted by the smoke. If you smell that, walk away from that cloud as soon as possible. It's devastating.
Yeah, and I've definitely smelled it. I've as I told you, I live downtown, and the absolute despair you see is hard to imagine in a state with the 7th largest GDP in the world, a city that is very well funded, and to see the absolute devastation in Skid Row is truly, it's a national shame.
Absolutely.
And you're policing this day in, day out. You're on foot.
Yep.
And at any minute, your life could be taken from you.
Absolutely.
And you have seemed to maintain a very dignified manner in handling these folks.
Right.
Whereby they almost respect you and kind of protect you. Speak on that, how the respect has gone both ways with the homeless community in Skid Row.
I have a saying that my badge, my gun, and handcuffs will never be my means to invoke positive change in people's lives. But my faith, my love for mankind, and my faith in mankind will always be my unyielding dogs of war. And that's what I've used. I believe how I treat people has protected me for the last 23 years in one of the most unpredictable places in America. And, you know, I've literally been in uses of forces where people will, you know, stand up for me when the supervisor comes, while you got these activists on one side saying that I tried to kill the man. They're like, no, if Joseph had to put hands on you, you had that coming, you know? So it's been a blessing that because I love on these people and I treat them with dignity and respect, because they should be treated with dignity and respect. Just because, I always say, because somebody's stressed out, ganged out, sexed out, whatever out, you know, it doesn't mean they're not loved by God. You know, somebody loves those folks, and I want to treat them the way I would want somebody to treat my son or my nieces if they fell down that path. And that's how I treat them, and it's worked for me. It's benefited me. The vast majority of them are Angelenos, but we are seeing an influx of people who are coming in from other parts of the country, other parts of the county, other parts of the state, because we kind of advertised that we were going to end homelessness, and they know that there's a hands-off approach going on right now. So they know that this is a place where you can come and do your thing and not much is going to happen to you. Same thing with San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland, and places like that, that's adopting this ideology, which is very, very dangerous. It's not the weather. California has always had nice weather. So now what's your excuse? It's not that the drugs are any better or worse than anywhere else. It's just that there's the consequences for those actions. There's no consequences anymore. And you can just come and do your thing, and you won't get chastised. There's barely any accountability. You get a ticket or you go to jail, you're out in a couple of hours. So there's no incentive for people to change their life, no mandatory programs. So this is kind of the place to be if you want to destroy yourself.
So if I'm a business owner, say they're on 7th and Wall Street, or 7th and San Pedro, or 7th and Julian, is the LAPD's policy not to arrest a gentleman or woman camping out in front of my business? I have to climb over them, open my roll door to get into my own business. What's LAPD's policy on camping out?
Well, per an injunction, we're not allowed, we're not the homeless police, okay? We are not allowed to arrest somebody for setting up an encampment on the sidewalk. Now, if they're blocking a sidewalk and committing ADA violations, we can warn them, offer them services. And now we don't even do that. We allow outreach teams to do that and try to get them to comply and give 3 feet of space. But right now, especially in the Skid Row zone, they're allowed to pretty much camp 24/7.
Right. And you are so familiar with the terrain that you know every street where the heroin is sold, where the various drugs are. It's an open drug bazaar, and you know exactly where these people are dealing dope. Mm-hmm. And there are also people mixed in with the homeless community that you and I would call predators.
Right.
They're preying on these people's vulnerabilities and their addiction.
Yeah.
And they're typically gang members.
Right.
Now, do they work in a kind of a clandestine way, meaning do they blend in with the homeless community, or can you kind of see them on the block and know which guy is running the show on that particular block?
Well, I know because I've been there 23 years, and I know their rap sheets, I know their names. But yes, they do the best they can to blend in, and most of them pretend to be homeless. Nowadays, some of them aren't even pretending anymore because they know the consequences are very minimal. If they get caught, they're going to get slapped on the wrist and released, and it's no big deal. But yeah, they do a good job of really blending in. Some of them will have housing in South LA, Compton, Watts, but they'll have tents that they'll pretend to stay in. Or even worse, let's say you have a person who's homeless who ended up getting low-income supportive housing. They finally got off the streets, but that person still owes drug debts to the local loan shark or drug dealer. The drug dealer finds out where they are and says, by the way, you still owe me money. I'm going to need you to help me turn this hotel out. Or they even kick them out of their own hotel rooms and use them for hours and hours and won't let them come back till 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning to get some sleep. And some of them, they don't even allow them to come back. So it's really traumatic what's happening to the community when the criminal element is now basically put on a pedestal. They're the victims, and the real victims are falling through the cracks.
Wow. And you're seeing parts of Skid Row that are designated to certain gangs, like the Crips run one part of the show, the Bloods, right, and the Latino gangs run the other sides.
Mostly in Skid Row, the black gangs run the show. But to the west, you'll have some more of the Hispanic gangs. But mostly in Skid Row, it's a mixture of black gangs who come together. And we don't know if they're operating in collusion, but we know they're operating in harmony. They kind of have a gentleman's agreement not to war with each other, keep the shootings down, or as best they can until something really breaks out. And we do a good job of preventing that as well because we're highly visible. But yes, they'll take over parks, take over hotels, divvy up territory, and they'll claim the block is there. And let's say if you're homeless and you want to set up a tent, you just got here from Idaho or somewhere, they're going to step to you and they're going to say, hey, look, you don't belong here. The only way you can stay here is if you hold my dope, let my women work in your tent, or you pay a tax. And that tax could be your entire Social Security check just to live on that block. Or some of them end up willing participants in the activity because they have to support their habit. So it's unfortunate, but until we loosen that grip, you're never going to see a change in Skid Row.
Right.
Ever.
Is there a particular Crip gang you see? Or do all the Crip gangs have a little stake in the action over there? The
biggest one is Grape Street, from what I see. But there's other gangs. There's Bounty Hunters, Roller 60s, Hoovers, Black Pea Stones. They all come in and they have to get the blessing to be able to work there. And once you get the blessing, pretty much, as long as you play ball, you're good. You're good to go.
And it's like Exxon or Chevron getting an oil field if you're a drug dealer, right?
Pretty much. Pretty much. The customers are aplenty. And why is it Skid Row attracted to there? Because you have 108 programs to help people with a myriad of issues, particularly drug addiction, alcohol addiction, mental illness, chronic homelessness. So that's a perfect place. And here's what makes it so different is because Skid Row is centered. It's also adjacent to these cities like South LA, Inglewood, Compton, Watts, Long Beach, Carson, Pasadena. So those who are disenfranchised who come in who need those services are also followed by the individuals from those communities to prey on them. And it's a never-ending cycle until we start taking that seriously.
Do you believe we should reenact mental health facilities?
To a small degree, and here's why. Those facilities were corrupt and they were inhumane. Now, what I hate is that we've adopted the philosophy that when something goes wrong with an entity, we throw the baby out with the bathwater, when you should just fix the bathwater so you can clean the baby. But that's not what happens. They close down the facilities and you get a lot of individuals who are released in the street who still need help, but now they're out there relying on their own vices, and what happens is they get medication that they're supposed to take, right? And what they do is when they get to places like Skid Row, they don't like taking their prescribed medication because it makes them feel down or lethargic. And in Skid Row, you got to be up and ready for anything. So they sell their prescribed medication or give it away, and then they start self-medicating on crack cocaine, heroin, spice, and even marijuana. Marijuana may not affect you or me, but for someone who's paranoid schizophrenic, hearing 10 voices, they're out of there. It exacerbates their problem. I'm here to tell the general public that as a police officer, and many thousands of cops across the nation will tell you, being mentally ill is not a crime. I'm not here criminalizing people because they're mentally ill. It's not a crime to be paranoid schizophrenic. It's not a crime to be bipolar. It's not a crime to be any of those things. But when those things meet methamphetamine, spice, and all the drugs that I've mentioned, they then become a police problem when they're assaulting someone else, running in front of a city bus, or assaulting a police officer. And a lot of people who are in the mental health field or advocates who challenge us to say, you guys shouldn't be handling this. It should be mental health experts. We agree, but in most of those cases, a mental health expert's not going to approach them when they're swinging a knife or when they look at it and they're displaying the objective symptoms of being under the influence of a hallucinogen. So we end up getting called anyway. And what do you do when there's a chemical buffer between you and the person you're trying to help? That's impossible. So we have to get them detained first. And most of the time we do it very well, but every now and then it can result in the use of force. And that's not because of a lack of training or compassion. It's just the drugs make it tougher to get that done. And no mental health clinician will approach them in that state. That's the truth.